Hi, everybody. My name is Dustin with www.gamblingonfreedom.com. I'm a certified hypnotherapist specializing in problem gambling, gambling addiction, compulsive gambling. And in today's video, I want to talk about, why people gamble even when they really don't want to, right? So if you're watching this and thinking, well, I genuinely want to stop, but somehow I just still can't, right? I want to start by just slowing everything down, right? For a moment, naming what's really happening for you guys. Okay, because most people who sort of land on videos like this, you're not careless, you're not indifferent. They're not reckless, they're not ignoring reality. They care. They care deeply about what's happening. They feel the regret, the stress, the emotional and financial consequences to everything that's happening. And they've likely promised themselves more than once that things can be different or will be different or could be different. And so the fact that you want to stop already tells me something important, which is that you're not in denial. You are aware, you see a pattern, but the awareness of that pattern alone hasn't been enough to create the change that you're looking for. And that's usually when people start to blame themselves and have a lot of shame and judgment towards themselves about not being able to quit, right? And they start to wonder what's wrong with them, why they can't follow through, why other people seem to be able to quit and not stay stuck like they are. And so this video really just exists to explain why that self-blame and that self-judgment and that self-shame, if you will, is really not being put where it truly belongs, right? Because the struggle will make sense once you understand how everything is happening underneath the gambling. Okay. So, one of the biggest misunderstandings around gambling addiction is the belief that wanting to stop automatically means you can, right? But the idea is that wanting to stop really is a conscious effort. It's prefrontal cortex. It's the part of you that plans and reflects and, weighs long-term consequences, weighs those consequences, imagines a better future, all these different things. The part of you that genuinely wants and means the promises that you make, right? They that logical part of you that truly believes that this will be different, right? But gambling and gambling addiction itself doesn't actually operate from this level of mind. It doesn't operate from your conscious awareness. It doesn't operate from your logic and your reasoning. It actually operates from your nervous system, from your limbic system. It activates when that different system inside of you actually takes more control. The one that moves faster than thought, faster than logic, faster than intention. And that's why people say things like, well, I knew better, but it didn't matter, or it just felt automatic, or it's just habit, or, I didn't even feel like myself when I was doing it. And so it's not that your conscious desire to quit gambling disappears. It's just that it gets overridden by a system designed to prioritize immediate internal relief over long-term consequences, right? And this is your survival system. This is your nervous system. Your nervous system just wants out of survival, just wants to pop right out, right? So unless you understand that distinction, that it's not that you're failing, it's not that you're, not disciplined enough or anything like that. It's simply that your nervous system is creating that movement towards gambling. When you understand that distinction, people can actually start to work with the right part of themselves that needs to be worked with, right? It's not the logic that needs to change. It's not the analyzing that has to happen more. It's not making a different decision. It's just simply understanding where it's actually coming from, your nervous system, your emotions. So, gambling urges themselves almost never come out of just nowhere. All right. They follow an internal shift. Sometimes it's very subtle and you don't even know it's happening. It might be stress building throughout the day. It might be boredom, emotional flatness, loneliness, frustration, pressure, right? Sometimes it even shows up right after relief, like right when the nervous system sort of drops back into a parasympathetic state where you're calm and you're relaxed and you're comfortable, but then it suddenly wants that stimulation again, right? So the key thing to understand is that the urge isn't really about gambling itself. It's about changing how you feel in your body, right? Gambling creates a rapid internal shift. It sharpens your focus, it narrows your attention, it numbs the discomfort, it creates anticipation, it creates control, it creates intensity. And once your nervous system learns that gambling can reliably produce that shift from pain to pleasure, it begins reaching for it more automatically, right? So at that point, the urge isn't really asking for permission. It's just executing a learned pattern that it knows works, right? So this is where many people get sort of trapped in the cycles of self-judgment, blame, shame, and they keep trying to overpower the urge to go gamble with rules and promises and logic and perceived consequences. And they tell themselves things like, this time I'll be better, this time I'll be stronger, this time I'll be more disciplined, use more willpower on the subject. But willpower only works when the nervous system is already calm and regulated and comfortable. And so when your body is activated, when you have anxiousness and restlessness and emptiness and overwhelm and internal pressure, the willpower literally loses its leverage. It has very little leverage, if any. And in those moments, your system isn't asking what's right or wrong. It's not considering future consequences. All it's asking is, how do I feel different right now? All I care about is feeling different right now. And gambling essentially was logged as an answer to that question, right? That doesn't mean you're weak. It just means that your nervous system learned a pattern, right? It learned a pattern that hasn't been replaced with something better or safer yet. That's all it is, right? So gambling is really just an attempted solution. This is maybe one of the hardest reframes people hear about gambling addiction. Gambling isn't the problem. Okay, gambling addiction, gambling, whatever, it's not the problem. The gambling addiction is actually the attempted solution to the real problem. All right, if you've listened to this channel before, you probably know that already, but the idea is it's never actually the problem. It's the attempted solution to whatever the real problem is. And gambling isn't happening because you want to ruin your life. Obviously you don't want to hurt yourself. You're not trying to do this on purpose. It's happening because at some level, whether it's an identity, a belief, a learned experience, a moral, a value, a principle, a feeling, something, it's serving a function. Gambling is serving you in some way. You have decided and justified the decision to do it, and it's serving you, right? And so it might be to regulate stress. It might be to create focus. It might be to fill emotional emptiness. It might be providing relief from some sort of past trauma, some internal pressure, some tension. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that gambling is a healthy, acceptable difference to those things, right? But it does kind of explain why simply trying to remove it doesn't actually work, right? So if you take away a coping mechanism from a person without addressing what it was coping for, the nervous system panics, right? And when the nervous system panics, it will pull that behavior back in, not because you failed, but because the system is trying to protect itself from that discomfort that it hasn't had relief around yet, and it doesn't know how to handle it, right? So when you take away a coping mechanism without actually processing the emotions and regulating the nervous system around why that coping mechanism was even needed in the first place, if you haven't processed that out, if you haven't actually shifted that issue, then it will just come back. That's where the relapse comes from, right? This is why the relapse happens, because the root of the issue wasn't actually satisfied, right? So, many people describe the relapse as if it just happened, right? One moment they were fine, and the next moment they were gambling again, right? And that's because the relapse usually isn't a conscious decision. It's not something that you logically want to do. It's a conditioned response from your nervous system. Your nervous system recognizes a familiar internal state, and then it moves towards that in the fastest way it can, right? It recognizes an internal state and it moves towards the fastest relief it knows. So it might, recognize the loneliness or the tension or the stress, and it knows that gambling is the fastest way out of that. And so by the time the conscious mind catches up, the behavior is already in motion. You're already going to the casino, you're downloading the app, you're betting. And that's why the relapse feels so disorienting, because the shame afterwards hits very hard. It feels like it wasn't you. It feels like something took control, like something took over, right? And in an important way, it wasn't the part of you that wants to change. So it wasn't this part of you. It wasn't your conscious mind. It wasn't your logic. It was the part of you that learned to survive discomfort long before you ever made the promise to stop, right? The part of you that learned that this stress and this loneliness and this boredom and this emptiness, this discomfort that I can't handle and deal with, the gambling lets me get my mind off it, distract myself, suppress the feeling, lets me reject it and resist it and judge it and push away from it, and lets me not deal with these things until after, right? But then after shows up with regret and shame. And so it's just a way to survive discomfort. Right? That's all it is. It's the way your nervous system learned to survive discomfort. And so over time, you have a repeated cycle of gambling and relapses, and that's when the regret begins to shape your identity. Right? This is where people start seeing themselves as someone who always messes up, can't stop, someone who will probably fail again. And that identity itself will create more and more pressure, more and more shame, more and more self distrust. Those internal states then feed directly into the nervous system patterns that trigger the gambling urges. And so even when you want to change, you're doing it from a identity that almost expects you to fail, right? And the nervous system will always follow your identity more than your conscious desires. Okay. So until that identity shifts, until the system learns that you can have safety instead of shame, the effort, the willpower, the conscious logic alone will keep running into that resistance. The resistance of identity, the resistance of belief, the resistance of emotion. And that's why it's so hard to change. Right. So when people finally understand that gambling addiction isn't a character flaw, but a nervous system pattern, something important can happen, right? The shame might soften, the panic eases, the problem becomes workable. Instead of asking questions like, well, what's wrong with me? The question really is, what is my nervous system trying to manage right now? Right? What is my nervous system trying to manage right now? Not because that understanding will necessarily bring a whole bunch of relief, not because the urge will disappear overnight, but because when you can understand the internal war inside, and when that internal war finally starts to slow down, that's when change really becomes possible. All right. So, yeah, lasting change, it doesn't start right when you stop. All right. If you want lasting change, if you want to build longevity with the change so that you no longer relapse and you no longer come back to it, it doesn't start right when you stop gambling. It actually starts with changing the internal conditions that made gambling necessary in the first place. Okay. So when the nervous system learns new ways to regulate your stress, your emotions, your identity, the internal pressures, the tensions, right? That's when gambling will lose its function. It'll be a non-negotiable. It'll be obsolete. It won't serve you the same way it has in the past. And at that point, the urge doesn't need to be fought, it just becomes unnecessary. People just override it. And this is why people who truly recover, they say things like, well, I didn't feel like I was forcing myself, or, it felt like just something clicked underneath the behavior, something resolved rather than something was suppressed, right? There's a difference. And so if you're watching this while you're struggling, or, right after another attempt to stop and a relapse, I want you to pause for just a moment, right? Just pause, take a moment. The fact that you're here tells me that you're already paying attention. You're not failing. Okay. You're not failing. You're simply responding or reacting exactly the way your nervous system will respond or react whenever it's learned a shortcut to relief. Right. That matters because it means that this pattern, it isn't permanent. It means that it's learned, and anything learned can be unlearned when approached the right way. And this is exactly what we do in my 8-week freedom program. It's designed to address all of these things. It's not about willpower or pressure, forcing yourself to quit. It's none of that. It's about understanding your specific gambling pattern, because everybody has a different one, regulating the nervous system states that drive those urges to go gamble, clearing the emotional charge underneath the behavior, finding the roots, building the resilience so that gambling no longer even has a role in your future. And the goal isn't just to stop. It's not just to stop gambling. It's to create stability and clarity and longevity without constantly fighting yourself or living on that edge of, will I go back? Right. So if you want support with that, if you want support working through your gambling problem in a structured, calm, non-judgmental way, you can book a consultation through the link below. We'll talk through what's actually happening for you and whether or not the Freedom Program is the right fit for you. And whether you reach out or not, guys, remember this. All right. Wanting to stop gambling, but still struggling doesn't mean you're broken. It just means that something inside of you learned a pattern, and patterns really can be changed. So if you want to change the pattern, the gambling problem pattern, click the link below, sign up for my consultation, and let's see if the 8-week freedom program will work for you. All right, guys, that's it for now. Hope this was helpful. Take care, everybody. Hope you guys have a good Christmas coming up, and goodbye for now.